this is my colleague Dr. Trivedi. Today we will wrestle with the theory of evolution.
But before we explore the modern theory of evolution, we must take a look at the ideas and theories proposed years before modern technology ever existed, which made tasks and other hands-on activities so much easier. Start.
We will first look at Lamarck's theory. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck lived during the 18th century and 19th century. He was a French naturalist who developed his own theory of evolution based off the fossil record and the idea of use and disuse. Lamarck believed that species change in response to the environment. For example, Lamarck claimed that giraffes develop long necks through the process of stretching to reach for food. Lamarck also proposed that these characteristics acquired during an organism's life could be passed down to offspring. Today we know that this is complete bogus. However, this laid the groundwork for the modern theory of evolution.
So Lamarck further believed in the principle of inheritance of acquired characteristics, where body features acquired in an organism's lifetime can be passed down to their offspring. This is once again not true, as we now see that only changes in the DNA of an organism are able to be passed down from parent to offspring. But the principle of the mutations in the DNA assisted Darwin in concluding the theory of evolution by natural selection. As random genetic mutations occur within an organism's genetic code, the beneficial mutations are preserved because they aid survival, a process known as natural selection. These beneficial mutations are passed on to the next generation. Over time, beneficial mutations accumulate and the result is an entirely different organism. Not just a variation of the original, but an entirely different species. Does anyone know the phrase that originated from Darwinian theory as a way of describing the mechanism of natural selection? If you answered survival of the fittest, you're right.
Even though there is significant evidence proving Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection is true, many scientists, researchers, and societies are against this belief. Let us delve into some of these misconceptions. A principal belief by most doubters of evolution is that the process improves organisms, thus causing life to get better over time. These are these various instances that demonstrate flaws in this statement. Take the cheetah, for example. Today, we are in a vast Serengeti in search of its predator.
Cheetahs are some of the most agile creatures that still exist today, yet they have some limits in their predatory behaviors. This organism can run at speeds of up to 100 kilometers per hour when chasing down prey, but they are commonly seen abandoning their hunts. This is because cheetahs are not built to run for an extended period of time. Instead, they must run in small bursts. Any prolonged periods of extraneous exercise can cause the cheetah's body to heat up and experience immense stress, ultimately causing them to abandon a hunt. This demonstrates that evolution has not caused the cheetah to become perfect organisms. There are always certain limitations. In this case, cheetahs have evolved immense capabilities in terms of speed, but have not evolved an efficient mechanism to hunt for prolonged periods of time. They are not as skilled in combat as their prey or predators that they compete with. This is why cheetahs catch 40% of the prey they hunt on average.
So evolution is not like fireworks, where one explosion can grab all of our attentions, but rather a series of fireworks that assimilate together to make an entire picture. It takes time for the effect to be seen within the environment. Although most instances of evolution occur over thousands of years, the sticklebacks demonstrate adaptations over a fairly short period of time. We will now visit Loughborough Lake in Alaska to evaluate another claim that runs nearly parallel to the misconceptions of evolution improving organisms, that evolution is not observable or testable.
Sticklebacks thrived in Loughborough Lake, Alaska during the 1980s. These fish were well adapted for the freshwater environment, but were eventually poisoned in order to allow trout to inhabit the lake. As a result, the freshwater stickleback population diminished before marine sticklebacks eventually swam into the lake. These marine sticklebacks had armor plates and large spikes that made them easy targets for dragonfly larvae which prey on the fish. Over time, scientists began to notice changes in the stickleback population in Loughborough Lake. The marine stickleback lacked the adaptations necessary to survive in a freshwater environment. Therefore, over a relatively short amount of time, the population evolved as natural selection selected for those sticklebacks with less armor and small spikes.
Found one. Paleontologists use the fossil record to construct timelines and cladograms of the fossils that they found. I found myself a fossil. One of the biggest controversies about the fossil record is that people disprove it because of the gaps that they find in it. For example, how aquatic animals became land-dwelling creatures over millions of years.
One of the biggest discoveries in recent years that connected the dots from how many marine animals ventured onto and became land dwellers is the discovery of the fossil of Tiktaalik. Scientists were missing the key link organism that was able to connect how amphibians evolved into mammals, and this creature was the right piece as it showed characteristics of both amphibians and mammals. Tiktaalik is thus shown as a transitional fossil because it is the first sight of an animal that brought life from only water to only land, while still possessing aquatic and terrestrial features. While the fin webbing is removed, it has bones that correspond to the upper arm, humerus, forearm, and radius and ulna, carpal bones, and a small neck portion seen for the first time in aquatic creatures. This proves that a common ancestor of humans is in fact an aquatic organism. Though many gaps still remain in the fossil record, the discovery of Tiktaalik proves Darwin's theory of evolution to be true, and that more of these transitional organisms exist, but humans have not found them.
As all life began in water, competition for resources was fierce, causing many organisms and species to die out. With little to no terrestrial species, marine species gradually moved their way onto land, but did not adapt to life on land. They had random mutations from which they benefited from, and that allowed them to sustain life on land, such as lungs and forelimbs. Only the organisms with the advantageous mutations were able to survive, reproduce, and initiate the start of a new species. Organisms that had mutations that were not beneficial to them died out. Let's take a look at the giraffe, for instance. Thus, giraffes with shorter necks would not be able to give the trait for a shorter neck to their offspring, because they would not be able to find a mate to reproduce with. Giraffes with the mutations for longer neck sizes, on the other hand, would be able to find a mate easier, allowing for reproduction of offspring. This allows the trait for a longer neck to be more concentrated in the gene pool of the giraffes than shorter neck length.
Finally, many have the misconception that natural selection is the only way populations can be modified over time. This can be disproven using a simple analogy that involves playing cards.
Here we have a standard deck of cards. There are 26 red cards and 26 black for a total of 52. This deck represents a hypothetical fish population in a river. Each card color represents a different set of alleles. Let's suppose that there was a period of intense rain and winds that caused a landslide, ultimately dividing the river and therefore the population in two. There are no longer 26 red and 26 black cards in each of the two newly formed populations. Now the frequency of each allele is no longer the same. These new allele frequencies will be displayed in the phenotypes of the future generations of offspring. Because the allele frequencies are not the same as the parent population, the two newly formed populations will not display the same characteristics as the original, and therefore will evolve independently of one another. This is an example of genetic drift, or more specifically, the bottleneck effect, in which a natural disaster non-selectively creates a loss in genetic variation, therefore causing certain alleles to be under or overrepresented in a population. This is an example of a process other than natural selection changing a population over time. Genetic drift causes a change in a gene pool due to chance.
Today we have uncovered some of the biggest misconceptions about evolution. Many people still don't believe the theory, but there's ample evidence that suggests otherwise. To recap, evolution is not perfect. There are still flaws in the body plans that explain why cheetahs cannot hunt for an extended period of time, or why humans experience pain in bones and joints. At the same time, organisms do not try to adapt. Instead, desirable traits are passed on to daughter generations.
Furthermore, the fossil record demonstrates the transition period in the brief history of Earth, such as the movement from aquatic environments to dry land. The fossil record, as well as small populations such as the sticklebacks of Loughborough Lake, demonstrate evidence of evolution. Finally, populations can be altered due to genetic drift, events that happen at random due to chance.
We want to thank you everyone for watching our amazing show. Have a good one. Goodbye.